Let's talk about some important things to consider when writing survey questions. One of those things is that the choices that you give people in response to your questions make a difference. You'll see a lot of surveys with choices on them, and that's because choices make it easier to analyze data. But if they aren't thoughtfully chosen, it can lead to some really bad results when you look at your data. My first example, the question is, how old are you? You have the choices 0 to 18, 18 to 22, 23 to 30, 30 to 40, and so on. So when we look at this list, there's a couple of problems. If you're 18 years old or 30 years old, how do you know which category to choose? You could choose 0 to 18 or 18 to 22. So it's really important that you make sure that your categories are mutually exclusive, that people fall into one category or the other. Otherwise, you're going to get some really skewed results out of your research. Right, so my next question is, how would you rate the rack? And the rack is Western's cafeteria. So if I only gave you two choices, good and bad, that's really difficult because you're like, what if I think they fall in the middle? So often 3, 4, maybe 5 choices is good. So good, fair, poor, I think would be a lot easier for me to answer a question. The one thing you want to be careful of is too many options can actually cause problems too. So somewhere that sweet spot is kind of seems about 3 to 5 choices is the most common that I see. One thing to note with this, if you did the survey last year and you only had the 2 options, and then you looked at it for this year, and you're like, oh, we better revise that. So you made 3 options for this year. You can't compare the percentage of people that said good last year to the percentage of people that said good this year. So when you change the number of choices, those percentages are going to change. So you can't compare from year to year unless you have the same question and the same choices each year. You can also use these choices to get the kind of results you want from your survey. So if I only gave you the options of fair and good, then I could say that 100% of the people that I surveyed had a positive reaction to the rack. Well, of course they're going to have a positive reaction. The only choices I gave them were positive choices. This next example, I was looking up a TV show online, and so the TV guy gave me a survey to fill out. And one of the questions was, how many hours per week do you typically spend streaming movies and shows? So one thing that I do is that I usually stream something while I'm grading papers, writing lectures, things like that. I just like that background noise. And so probably 4 to 5 hours a day, I have something streaming on my devices. And so 4 or 5 times 7 days is about 30 hours. Now there are 5 choices, and I'm obviously in the biggest choice, but that starts at 15 plus. And if I were conducting this survey, I'd probably add another choice in there to differentiate between people that are maybe watching 2 to 3 hours a day streaming versus someone like me who's streaming a good chunk of the day. So I'd want to be able to differentiate those two groups. So adding another one in there that would capture, another choice that would capture that would be important to me. All right, so our next thing that's important to think about is that the order that you ask the questions in also matters. So consider a 2-question survey regarding the happiness of college students. One group was first asked, how happy are you on a scale from 1 to 5? And then how many dates did you go on last month? The other group was first asked about how many dates they've been on, and then they were asked to rate how happy they are. So here's the correlation that we got between both of these. So in the first version, when I first asked, how happy are you? And then how many dates? The correlation coefficient is R is equal to negative 0.012. So basically there's no linear relationship there at all. And apparently these two variables don't seem to be related to each other, at least on a linear level. Now, if I ask it in the other order, this is what's really fascinating. So if I ask how many dates people went on, and then to rate their happiness, that correlation coefficient went up to R equals 0.66, which is a moderately strong relationship. So my guess is, I mean, hopefully that dating is a positive, happy experience, that asking people how many dates they went on hopefully brought up some happy, positive memories. So then when they're asked to rate how happy they were, that emotion is already there, so you're going to get a stronger relationship there. Okay, so just that even that order in which you ask those questions makes a big difference. And then the wording matters as well. So loaded questions kind of assume facts that may not be true. So let's look at some examples. Have you stopped beating your wife? Okay, so that implies you've been beating her all along, because whether you say yes or no, either you stopped doing it or you're still doing it, but at some point in time you were doing it. Are you still abusing medication? What were you wearing when you robbed the bank? So we're assuming you robbed the bank. And, you know, good lawyers that are questioning people in court will ask questions that way, hoping that that person will slip up and say, you know, oh, I was wearing a black hoodie or something like that, right? Because then they're basically admitting that they're guilty. Is it difficult to hide your incompetence? When did you become an alcoholic? This one comes up in interviews. So why do you feel our firm is the best employer in the US? So, right, that's a question you have to think through, because maybe you don't think that they are the best employer, but you've still got to figure out a way to answer that question. At what time did you see Sally cheat on the test? So that assumes that Sally actually did cheat on the test. So all of these are loaded questions that can really play with people's memory. So this is that response bias that can go on. The verbs and adjectives you use also make a big difference. So if we're questioning people after they've witnessed a car accident, and we were asking them to estimate how fast the cars were going, if I said, about how fast are the cars going when they bumped into each other, when they hit each other, when they smashed into each other, or when they demolished each other. So that first line is the same in all of those. How fast do you think the cars were going? But that second line is where I can sneak that word in and influence people's minds and perception of their memory. So this is actually based on a famous experiment done in the 70s. And they found that people actually rated those cars slower when you used words like bumped, versus if you asked them how fast they were going when they smashed or demolished each other, people rated the speed significantly higher. So even just those words that we choose to use can influence people's memory and therefore influence people's responses.